Imagine standing in a dimly lit chapel in Naples, Italy. The air is cool, heavy with the silence of centuries, and there, resting on a marble slab before you, is a figure draped in cloth, except the cloth isn't cloth at all. It's stone. Cold, hard, unforgiving marble. And yet it falls across the figure's face with such impossible delicacy, such heartbreaking precision, that you can see the outline of closed eyelids, the subtle curve of parted lips, the faint tension of a nose pressed gently against the veil from beneath. You reach out, almost involuntarily, because every nerve in your body insists you are looking at real fabric, and then your fingers touch solid marble and something inside you quietly breaks. This is the Cristo Velato, the veiled Christ. And for nearly 300 years, people have stood in that very spot, asking the same unanswerable question: how is this even possible? The sculpture sits in a private museum in Naples called the Sansevero Chapel, or Cappella Sansevero, a building as extraordinary and as mysterious as the work it houses. The chapel was built in the early 1500s, but it was transformed in the 18th century by a man whose ambitions stretched far beyond anything his contemporaries could comfortably comprehend. His name was Raimondo di Sangro, the Prince of Sansevero. And to understand the veiled Christ, you must first understand him. Di Sangro was not an ordinary nobleman. He was an inventor, an alchemist, a military engineer, a Freemason, and by many accounts, a man who frightened the people around him. He corresponded with the great minds of his era, created fireworks displays that allegedly produced colors no one had ever seen, and developed a new printing technique that impressed even Benjamin Franklin. He was, in the most literal sense of the phrase, a man ahead of his time. The Catholic Church excommunicated him, twice, before eventually reconciling with him under political pressure. His chapel, filled with extraordinary sculptures, was his monument to himself and to the boundaries of human knowledge. And right at the center of it all, commissioned in 1753, was the veiled Christ. The sculptor he entrusted with this impossible task was Giuseppe Sanmartino, a relatively young Neapolitan artist, just 30 years old at the time, who had shown remarkable promise but had yet to produce anything that would have predicted what he was about to achieve. The commission was breathtakingly ambitious. Carve, from a single block of white marble, the body of Christ lying in repose after the crucifixion, covered entirely by a transparent funeral shroud. Not suggested, not implied, transparent. You would see the wounds, the face, the texture of the body beneath, all through a veil of solid stone. What Sanmartino produced in 1753 is, by almost any measure, the most technically astonishing piece of marble sculpture ever made. The veil covers the figure completely from head to toe, and yet it conceals almost nothing. You can count the fingers of his hands. You can see the nail wound in his left foot. You can trace the line of his jaw, the hollows of his eyes. The fabric seems to pool and gather at the edges of the plinth with the exact behavior of wet linen drying in still air. Every crease is logical. Every fold obeys gravity. It is not a depiction of a veil. It is a veil, one that happens to be made of stone. And this is where the mystery begins to deepen, because for generations, people refused to believe that this was simply masterful sculpting. The legend that took hold, and spread with remarkable speed through educated European society, was that the veil was not carved at all. The story went that Raimondo di Sangro, with his alchemical knowledge, had developed a process for chemically transforming real cloth into marble. That the veil had once been an actual piece of linen draped over the figure and then petrified, turned to stone, through some secret chemical process the prince had discovered and guarded obsessively. It's a story almost too good to dismiss. Di Sangro was the kind of man about whom such stories were told, and often the stories turned out to be rooted in something real. Even the great neoclassical sculptor Antonio Canova, one of the finest artists of the 18th century and a man who knew marble the way a musician knows silence, reportedly visited the chapel, stood before the veiled Christ, and declared that he would have given up his entire life's work to have made it. He, too, found it hard to believe it was simply carved. That a sculptor of Canova's magnitude could not fully account for what he was seeing tells you something about how genuinely extraordinary this work is. Modern scientific analysis has since confirmed that the veil is indeed carved marble, the same single block as the figure beneath it, worked by hand from the same raw material. There is no chemical transformation, no alchemical secret. It is just stone. But that answer, rather than dissolving the mystery, somehow deepens it. Because if Sanmartino did this purely through skill, through an understanding of how marble behaves, through a chisel and decades of intuition, then what he accomplished is arguably more miraculous than any alchemical trick. He made stone forget what it was. The question that obsessed art historians for decades was how he achieved it technically. The dominant theory, and the most credible one, involves working the marble in stages, carving the body of Christ first, then working the veil from the stone above, gradually thinning it to extraordinary fineness without ever breaking it, using specialized tools to undercut the fabric shapes and create the illusion of depth and translucency. The skill required to do this without shattering the stone, which, at its thinnest points, is believed to be just a few millimeters, is almost incomprehensible. A single mistimed strike, a single miscalculation in the angle of approach, and 3 months of work collapses into rubble. Sanmartino didn't just have talent, he had nerves made of the same marble he was carving. What makes the veiled Christ emotionally devastating, beyond its technical virtuosity, is what it depicts. This is a dead man. This is a body in the moments after an execution, lying in the stillness that follows suffering. The wounds on the hands and feet are not dramatic or theatrical. They are quiet, precise, almost medical in their accuracy. The face beneath the veil does not wear an expression of transcendence or peaceful beatitude, as so many religious sculptures of the era favored. It wears the unmistakable expression of a human being who has simply stopped. There is exhaustion in those marble features. There is finality. Sanmartino did not sculpt a saint. He sculpted a person. And that specificity, that human intimacy, hits the viewer somewhere the religious iconography alone never could. The chapel itself adds another layer to the experience. The Sansevero chapel is filled with sculptures that push at the limits of what marble can be made to do. A figure carved to look as though he is breaking free from a marble net, another wrapped in a stone cloth representing disillusionment. And in a basement room beneath the altar, Sangro apparently kept 2 human skeletons with their arterial systems preserved in extraordinary detail. An experiment in anatomy that no one has fully explained to this day. The whole building feels less like a chapel and more like the private laboratory of a man determined to prove that the boundaries between science, art, and the impossible were negotiable. Raimondo de Sangro died in 1771, taking most of his secrets with him. Giuseppe Sanmartino went on to a long career, but he never produced anything that came close to what he achieved in that one commission. Some artists have one moment where everything they are converges into a single work, and that work becomes greater than anything explainable by craft alone. The Veiled Christ is that moment. Today, the chapel draws over 300,000 visitors a year, more than many far more famous museums. People come from every corner of the world, and they all do the same thing. They walk in, they see it, and they stop. Not because they've been told to, but because the human brain, for all its sophistication, finds itself momentarily unable to resolve what the eyes are reporting. The stone says one thing, the mind says another. And in that gap, that brief bewildering silence between perception and comprehension, something profound happens. Perhaps that is the real secret. Not a chemical formula, not an alchemical process, but the discovery that art, at its absolute limit, can make the world briefly unintelligible, can take something as old and hard and inert as marble and make it breathe, make it mourn, make you forget for just a moment and everything you thought you knew about what stone could never do. The veiled Christ shouldn't exist, and yet here it is, still waiting in a quiet chapel in Naples for the next person to walk in and be undone.